Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a radical, honestly kind of counterintuitive theory about our modern healthcare system. It's built on the groundbreaking work of social philosopher Ivan Illich. If you've ever felt like modern medicine somehow overcomplicates the basic human experience, well, you absolutely need to hear this.
So, let's kick things off with a pretty provocative question that sits right at the center of today's source material. Is it actually possible that expanding our medical institutions is making us sicker? I know, it sounds totally backwards, right? We're so conditioned to view more healthcare, new tech, and extra hospitals as this unmitigated good. But what if there's a tipping point?
To really get this critique, we've got to look at a crucial term Illich popularized, iatrogenesis. Literally, it translates to doctor-generated. It's talking about health-harming effects that are actually caused by medical intervention itself. Illich took this concept and just completely flipped our traditional view of healing upside down. He expanded this idea way beyond just a simple surgical error, turning it into this massive, sweeping societal critique.
To see just how deep this rabbit hole goes, we're going to cover medicine's hidden threat, clinical harm, social harm, cultural harm, the tipping point, and finally, a prophecy come true.
All right, Section 1. Medicine's hidden threat, the phantom of health. Okay, picture this. The year is 1976. Ivan Illich drops a fiercely debated book called Medical Nemesis, The Expropriation of Health. And in it, he wasn't just arguing that medicine had a few flaws here and there. No, he argued that the medical establishment itself had literally become a major threat to human health. He wasn't anti-science by any means, but he was just deeply concerned about the sheer scale and reach of industrial medicine bleeding into our everyday lives.
Let's look at Section 2, clinical harm, or direct damage.
So Illich broke this threat down into three distinct dimensions. The most visible one is clinical iatrogenesis. This covers the direct, observable pain, sickness, and even death resulting from medical care. We're talking adverse drug reactions, hospital-acquired or nosocomial infections, like those nasty antibiotic-resistant strains breeding right inside sterile environments, plus surgical and diagnostic mishaps. But here's the kicker. These physical harms aren't framed as just accidental anomalies or the fault of a few bad doctors. Instead, Illich argued that these harms are actually structural. Harm is an unavoidable statistical consequence. When medicine relies on increasingly powerful, highly aggressive, and toxic technologies, the margin for this kind of direct, doctor-generated damage naturally widens. It's basically a numbers game. The more complex and potent the tool, the higher the statistical probability of it causing secondary harm. Moving to Section 3, social harm and the medicalizing of everyday life.
This brings us to what I think is his most profound warning, the medicalization of everyday life. This happens when the establishment indirectly fosters harmful conditions by essentially turning society into a giant health-seeking machine. Think about normal human experiences: birth, aging, menopause, grief, sadness. Under a highly medicalized system, these get redefined as medical pathologies requiring expert intervention. I mean, we've literally reached a point where we feel we need a smartwatch to tell us how to sleep and a prescription to deal with normal human sadness. We're stripping away the normalcy of the human condition and swapping it for a constant need for a doctor's permission.
And, this builds into a pretty vicious cycle. First, you stratify society into producers of health, the medical establishment, and consumers, which is the rest of us. Second, because of this weird dynamic, individuals end up surrendering their personal agency to take on what Illich calls the sick role. And third, we just endlessly expand bureaucracies and hospitals while completely ignoring the socio-economic root causes of poor health, things like poverty or inadequate housing. We're essentially trying to medicate social problems.
Which brings us to Section 4, cultural harm and losing our resilience.
This is the third and deepest layer of the onion. If clinical harm is physical and social harm is behavioral, well, cultural harm strikes right at our spirit. The crucial takeaway here is the loss of traditional coping mechanisms and resilience. By relying on professionals for every single physical ache or emotional bump, we lose our cultural capacity to deal with human suffering autonomously. Health is expropriated. It becomes this manufactured commodity. It even gets to the point where death itself is viewed strictly as a technical failure of the hospital apparatus, rather than a natural part of life.
There's this quote directly from the source material that hits the nail on the head. True health encompasses the capacity to suffer, age, and die without total institutional subjugation. Medical Nemesis wasn't some wild call to burn down hospitals or abandon medicine.
Actually, it was a plea to reclaim our personal and communal autonomy over the human experience.
Now, Section 5, the tipping point. So how exactly does a well-intentioned system reach a point where it does so much unseen damage? Illich explains this through the concept of counterproductivity. Basically, this is the threshold at which an institution defeats its own primary purpose, producing more disease than it cures. For medicine, it's when bureaucratic, hyper-medicalized intervention starts generating more illness, anxiety, and dependency than it actually fixes. The machine just gets so large that it overshoots its original mission. And that leads us to our final section, Section 6, a prophecy come true. What makes this explainer so vital right now is that Illich wasn't just observing his own era back in 1976, he was predicting ours. We can trace an unbroken line from his warnings straight to contemporary public health crises, from institutional pain management policies in the 2000s that catalyzed the opioid epidemic, all the way to today, and this ongoing, widespread pharmaceuticalization of daily life. His dimensions of social and clinical harm map perfectly to our modern world.
These modern examples are just counterproductivity in action. We see the overdiagnosis and overtreatment of completely harmless abnormalities, which causes massive needless anxiety. That's clinical iatrogenesis 101. Then there's the opioid epidemic, directly driven by institutional policies. And of course, the relentless pharmaceuticalization of our lifestyle choices and mental health. It perfectly illustrates his warning about the medicalisation of everyday life.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. When you reflect on Illich's warning about the medicalized life, ask yourself, in the pursuit of perfect health, how much of your actual human experience, your natural capacity to feel, cope, and age, are you willing to surrender to an institution? It's a huge question about personal resilience, and honestly, one that's more relevant today than ever. Thanks for hanging out with me for this one. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.